Greetings, fencers. So I was asked recently, what sort of gear do I use for coaching? And so that would be drilling or coach sparring. And so it's often going to be very different to actually the gear that I use for tournaments. But I'm just going to share some of the things that I've learned, because I didn't just start off doing this. It's taken years and years to figure out what are some of the things that are good and what are some of the things that affect how a student is learning that the coach can manipulate and change. So we're going to go through the weapons that we'll use, so what we're choosing for the different tasks for drilling, what we're going to use for our thrust impact, and our cutting impact. And also I'll show what my favorite piece of gear was for coaching that I almost always wear now, especially if it's a private. It's just a guaranteed thing that I'm wearing the whole private. And so we'll talk a little bit about the weapons. So one of the big things that comes up is you really need a flexible sword for practicing thrusts. If your sword is too stiff, there's going to be lots of side effects that end up happening. Now for sparring or for tournaments, you can have a sword that's a little bit stiffer. Okay, you're not going to be hitting someone over and over again, but that's the big difference with drilling is someone's going to be hitting you maybe in the exact same spot over and over, maybe 400 times in an hour. You can't take that over and over again. You're going to start modifying what you're doing. So something like a Regagné Strong is just too stiff. Okay, I'm not going to ever give this to someone to thrust at me, even though this will flex. I've had lots of tournament matches with it where it almost bends in on itself. So it's fine for getting that hit, but you just can't take hits over and over with it. The other important reason is not just for you, but it's also for your student. If a student is too light or too small, they're not going to get good thrusting structure with a sword that is too stiff. You need to have a flexible sword that you can give them. Okay, so having one brand of flexible sword in your arsenal that you bring to the class, even if it's just for the thrusting element of the class, you need one of those. That way, when they go to thrust, they don't get pushed backwards. So when they extend and as the sword flexes, they get sent back and their arms bend in. They need to be able to extend their arm and move their body forwards. They can't have the sword pushing back on them. So that's a huge deal. So a Regagné Light, Siggy's. Siggy has their new Siggy Light, but those are like $500. So synthetics are another way to get to that. So the Purple Heart Armory synthetics are probably the most flexible with the widest tip and have the least amount of impact. Red Dragons and Black Fencers are good. I find Red Dragons, their tip is quite thin, so you do want extra padding for taking that over and over again. But it's still a very flexible sword where people who are light enough are going to be able to get a good thrusting structure, and it's not going to give them bad habits. You can always modify your fencing once you're sparring, and you'll have that good thrusting structure. But if you're never getting a time to get that good structure, it's not going to come naturally. You need a flexible sword that you can actually extend your arms out. But one of the other ways to also get that, not just with longsword synthetics, people will be able to get that good thrusting structure with foils or épée blades. And so these sport fencing blades are also good. They'll be one-handed, but at least they can get that practice extending their arm and having that good flex where they can practice how their footwork gets them to the hit, and they're not having to think about how this sword pushes back at them. I've met some people at tournaments where they just got unlucky and they bought a really crappy longsword as their first sword, and they don't have the money to just buy another sword, and their fencing is riddled with artifacts from having this either overly heavy, overly stiff, or really thin-edged longsword that just has lots of problems. You need to be able to train with multiple, and you need one that's safe enough for sparring. So I usually use a Kveiten. It's generally my favorite tournament sword, and I can have someone drill with it, but it is reasonably stiff, and so I always hand people Siggies if they're going to be thrusting at me 600 times that day. And for Messer, it's a little bit harder to find a flexible Messer. The Gottfried from Landsknecht Emporium is very flexible. So this one, even very small people can get that good flex with it. So that's a good option for a flexible Messer. There is also just a flat out benefit, not just for thrust, but getting people time with a lighter sword. Not everyone's going to have the muscle strength to be able to go a whole class with a heavy sword. You want them to be able to keep doing techniques. I find, especially with Messer, if people have a Messer that's a little bit too heavy, or even a long sword, they just stop being able to bring their sword up over their head for a hanging parry, and it just doesn't get there in time. These are Nova swords, so a Messer and a Dusak, extremely light. I think they're like 500, 600 grams, and so even smaller people can just bring it up effortlessly, and every movement is snappy and it just looks really good. So they look good with the light weapon, and that way they can train technique, and slowly they'll build up to being able to use heavier weapons. Now, a benefit can also be from heavier swords. So you don't want to exclusively use too light of weapons if they're extremely light, especially like foam. Having some time with a heavy weapon just shows flaws in your structure, and it shows how, okay, you maybe can't get away with hyperextending your wrist. You can with a foam and you're not going to hurt your wrist, but with this, you send that out, you're going to eventually have a hurt wrist, and you're going to start feeling the strain very quickly, and so you have to tighten up that cutting structure with something like an SGT that's, you know, closer to 4 pounds. Feels good, but it's just a big sword, 54 inches. And so if you swing something like this, if I swing my arms way ahead of my legs, it's gonna pull me past, because I need my body to be able to control this sword. I can't just send it out away from my body and not have control over it. The Kveiten Messer is an example of a Messer that does the same thing. You're gonna hurt your wrist if you send it out without any structure in your arm. This is the one that's hurt my wrist at times. And so you have to be able to know what you're cutting at and have your body behind that cut. Otherwise, you're gonna get hurt. And so some time with some of these heavier blades help you connect the blade to your body in order to have control over the weapon. And so looking at protection for the thrust. Again, it's not looking at just can you take one thrust, it's taking it over and over again without your structure ever being impacted, and you need to be able to move on the rest of your day. You don't have to be tough, you want to just feel nothing. So hockey neck guards are great for that, the hockey goalie neck guards, because they're just a rock hard plate over your breastbone, and so you can take thrust after thrust after thrust, you're never going to feel it. It's just no impact. A lot of the HEMA neck guards, they're just a foam insert. You're still going to feel it underneath, but stuff like a CCM goalie neck guard with a hard plate, some sort of hard plate added afterwards, is a good neck guard for that. I also find them way more comfortable. Now, we do have some thick jackets like the Fang jacket, which I have used at times. So it's got a big built-in neck guard, and so it's good. It is really big, and because we're going to go through the next couple pieces of gear, I often find it not fully necessary, but it is definitely an option out there for something where you're now not going to take any harm, because stuff just can't really even get to your skin for most of your neck area. There are lots of types of plastrons and underplastrons. These are good, they just don't quite cover everything. So I'm going to take thrusts here, 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 as I'm doing a drilling session, and this is not going to cover it. And so second I take a hit there, 10 times in a row, I gotta sort of move and take a break, get something to change, because I can't just take that over and over again. Also, when these are on the outside of the jacket, stuff slides on them. You can't do that, like you don't really want that to be happening. So you have to wear it on the inside, and sometimes they're not quite comfortable. Your arms cross and they impact, especially for longsword. One-handed, it's not really a big deal, but again, you just have this really big meaty part that's always visible. So my favorite piece of gear that I recently got is one of the Spec aprons or plastrons, and so it's got 4 straps that go around, and it just means that everything's covered with an extra layer of foam. This bib also goes over top of your mask, and it's got foam in the neck, and so you just have now even more layers over the neck. And here you still feel a little bit because it's not rock solid, but you feel very little. So even when someone's wanting to drill with an ensifer or with a cavetin, I'm fine taking those and I can last. And I knew it was a thing for a long time. Finally I decided to get it just because I was ordering something else from Spec, and definitely glad I did, because it just makes it, now I can have someone practice thrusts just over and over, and I don't need to care. I can wear my light jacket, so my AP light, and it's fine, there's no issue. So for cutting impact, again, it's not about what I prefer in a tournament. I always like to be light and as mobile as possible. It's about what takes the least amount of impact when I'm getting hit over and over. Because I also want to purposefully get hit. In coach sparring, you're not supposed to punish them for doing something right. You're supposed to let them hit you when they did what you want. And so sometimes you're in weird positions because you're letting them land the hit, and you might get hit in some weird places where you're not used to, because you're not actively going to get that parry. So especially if you're practicing spheres and cuts to the side of the head, overlays don't really protect. This padding here doesn't do that much to protect because mesh is right against your ear. And so this is going right onto your temple, right on the ear, over and over again. It sucks to get hit there. Fencing masks aren't designed to take that type of protection, and so eventually for HEMA, fencing masks are going to have to be gone. Probably, bib will be gone. There'll be some sort of helmet shape. Neck guard will be attached to the jacket as standard. You're not allowed to use anything else. But for now, there are Cobra masks as well as the overlays to give that side of the head protection and actually add something that's going to displace the impact and give you that full protection so someone can cut at you over and over again, and it's not going to be too big of a deal. Then the next thing up for me, I have really bony shoulders, and so I always have plastic plates inside my shoulders because that's a spot I've been hit too many times with, and it's sort of taken me out for the day where it just hurts to move my arm. So always having some sort of shoulder protection for me, I always want that on, especially for coach sparring. Now also in tournaments, I always want to use light forearm guards. This is going to be one of the forearm guards that I prefer to use if it's not somehow already attached to my glove, and so this is going to be great, but there's a lot of open area where there's nothing protecting your arm, and you're going to get hit there. If you want someone to really practice getting that cut onto the arm, you're going to get hit over and over, maybe at the same spot. You don't want to wear these. You got to get yourself a pair of the heavy Spec or Superior Fencing forearms, because this is going to cover almost everything. And then you're not going to feel cuts essentially at all, which is great. You're fine putting that arm there and letting someone hit it over and over again. And then gloves, sparring gloves, they're my absolute favorite glove. They have a lot of gaps, taking thrusts in here, and every single one of these slots in the accordion protection on the wrist, that's a spot for a potential injury. In tournaments, people take that risk. For coach sparring, I want someone to be able to cut at this arm and not worry about disabling me for a month from landing it right on the wrist bone. Along with 5-finger gloves, there's also lots of gaps in 5-finger gloves. You're going to take lots of hits. It's going to make you not want to let them land that hit when they did what they were supposed to. So Spec heavies with added thumb protection, or new Spec heavies, are going to be one of the best choices, and they're what I always use for coached sparring and most of the time for drilling, unless I know that they're not going to be hitting my hands over and over again, because you need to be able to take those hits and not be worrying about your own hand safety. So you need a pair of thick mittens. There's lots of brands now, like the Black Knights and some Superior Fencing ones now as well. So Spess isn't the only one, but you need a heavy pair of mitts for coach sparring. You want protection for the legs. You want them to be able to hit the legs. So a nice thick kilt, something that covers everything. You don't want to go without leg protection because it means they're not going to be hitting you as fast as they should be. So getting something on so that way they can land those leg hits. And then finally, you want something that encompasses all of your leg protection, the gap over the knee, everything on the side of the knee. If you have one that covers the back of the leg, that's great too. That way if they practice stepping around you with some sort of offline footwork, you don't have to worry about always turning your leg when you let them hit. So you really don't want to be using some sort of really light, street hockey, shin pad, something that doesn't fully protect the knee. This one's okay, but it has lots of gaps on the side. This one has a gap right at the front as well. And so these are fine for a tournament where you're not going to be getting hit over and over again. And it's nice and light. You got to have something that's full protection for full coach sparring. And thanks for watching. Keep studying, keep practicing.